Hello class. So today we're going to be modeling a cardboard box model, interaction model within Solidworks. We're going to be modeling all the parts of it and then showing how to actually go about setting up those parts to be laser cut as well. This is going to be a long video just because I'm going through the full process of modeling all the components and everything and then getting them ready for laser cut. And I'm probably going to run into some problems. I haven't, let's say, gone through this model before, so we'll run into some problems, we'll solve it. I may be flopping around between how I'm doing things, but it's a video, you can pause, rewind, rewatch things. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is let's take a look at what we're going to be making. So I've drawn a rough sketch here of the object that we're going to be making today, and it's going to be this thing. It's sort of like a rice cooker. It's going to have a main body and then these two side protrusions. The main body is going to have a knob, some buttons, a slot in which we can slide our phone in. This is why I have the iPhone dimensions here. This is just the dimensions for my phone in its case. It's going to have this big lid on top which will lift off, an internal cavity. And then these side sort of boxes, one of them, this side, is going to be a rice holder with a small door that flips up. These two slits here will be used for some paper that's going to slide up and down to sort of indicate the level of the rice. And then this one on this side will be, we'll have a base attached to the box, and then this piece will be removable. It'll be like a water tank is the intention. So this is what we're going to work from. So I've got my SolidWorks environment open. I have a part file open. We're going to be modeling this as a multi-body part. The goal of this is so that we can have everything kind of in a part file. It's a little more easy to handle, but then we'll save out all the bodies as different parts and then recombine them in an assembly and also use those to do our setup for our laser cut. This is sort of the easier way of doing this. There are some other methods, some top-down approaches, but for now, for this project, this will be just fine. So we have our file saved. We're in box model 3 here. And so now we sort of have to decide how we want to begin. What we're going to do is we're first going to model this center section, and we'll sort of attach these two side boxes. We're going to model the big side panels first, and then sort of just connect everything in between. So the first step we actually want to do is we're going to begin on the top plane. We're just going to make a sketch. And this is going to help us define sort of the size of our object. So we're going to pull out a rectangle, pretty straightforward. Let's make it 14 inches deep and 10 inches wide. And so this seems like a pretty good place to start. Our sketch is now fully defined. You can see that all our lines are black. Exit the sketch, swing back to isometric view. So now, in order to do side panels, we're going to create some reference geometry. We're going to create two planes, which will basically be the sides, the sidemost extents of our rice cooker. So we're going to go with the right plane, and we're going to bring that out to this line, and we're going to do the same thing out to that line. And we can do it off of plane 1 or the right plane. It won't matter in this case. So now we've got these two planes, sort of TIE fighter shape, I guess. But say we wanted this to be slightly wider. A really easy way to do this is if we just click on sketch 1, don't actually edit it, we just click it. It'll bring up its dimensions. If we double click on one of those, we can edit them. And so we can say we actually want this to be 12 inches. So we enter 12, we hit enter. And then I'm going to hit Control B, so also the same as clicking this button up here, which is just rebuild, and so it'll sort of refresh what we're seeing. So now we've got our size correct. So now it's time that we actually start modeling each panel. So we're going to start on plane 1, and we're going to say sketch. We're going to view that normal. I'm actually going to flip it around. So our front view here is going to be to the right, I guess. Yeah. So the front is to the right. So when we view our sketch normally, so our front is going to be over here. What we're going to do is we're also going to treat the top plane as the bottom, as the ground plane. And so really quickly, kind of roughing it, we're just going to draw in our shape. So it's going to be sort of that shape. There. So we've got our basic form here. And so now we probably want to go in and start doing some level of defining sizes and dimensions. One thing we're also going to do is add some feet to this. Most products don't actually sit straight on the ground. Most sit off on some little raised portion, so we're going to add in some little feet. So let's go ahead and start throwing some dimensions on here. A lot of these dimensions are going to be arbitrary, or sort of just what seems to look right for this demo. If I was really planning this out, I would probably find a similar object that exists and measure it and see what makes sense. So I'd go find a rice cooker and see what makes sense in terms of the volumes. In this case, I'm just going to kind of mark some things out. So we'll do that back one is 10 inches. This one as to 4. Let's see. We'll make this slant 5 inches here tall. 8 inches there. There may be some periods where I'm not talking. I'm trying to like sort of talk through this, but sometimes it can get a little difficult, I guess, to talk through a model. Whoops. I think I am, I'm slightly off. So we want to make sure that we are coincident with things. Also, now I realize I'm on the wrong side. Whoops. Yep, totally building this backwards. That happens. So let's see if I can flip this around. This may end up kind of strange for a moment. But good to get this kind of stuff resolved early on. We'll reduce problems later. Whoops. Because I really do want the front view of this to be my front. Oh, now we have a total mess here. There we go. Oh, let's see if I can do this. Another way of fixing something like this is by double-clicking on it and then clicking reverse dimension. There we go. Just like that. Rather than deleting it and drawing it back in. Ah, look at that. Now we're nicely fully defined. Mainly that was setting those bottom points. And so by setting those bottom points to this original sketch, that's really quite helpful. Because now if we want to change the length and width, we can do that all from that sketch 1. And we may even go back in and rename sketch 1 as something like main size or something just so that we know what that is. So great, we've got our form here, but now we want to add those feet. An easy way of adding feet to a model like this is just some simple cutouts. We'll end up doing something similar on the front and back, and so we'll end up sort of with a faux square foot. Just delete that in between, probably throw some dimensions on there. So make those equal. Give that some dimension. And probably an angle here, maybe? Let's try an angle. 60 degrees. That seems good. There we go. Fully defined. If we exit the sketch, you'll notice that we don't have a dash next to it. We're nice and fully defined. Great. So now we can make the first extrusion of our box model. This particular extrusion becomes very important. So we're going to make this one 0.15 inches deep. We don't know our material thickness that we're going to be making this out of yet. So we might be making this out of a chipboard or a cardboard or something, but so we're going to give it a dimension to begin with. So we've got this dimension on here for this first extrusion. And so this is where sort of the parametrics of SolidWorks can become really powerful. So we're going to click on this extrusion. You'll notice that we have this dimension here. This dimension is blue because it's not necessarily defined or attached to something. We can easily kind of change it. And so if we double click on this dimension, we're going to get the window. And so I'm going to show you how to get that again. So I'm going to cancel out. So I click once on the extrusion on the feature, and then I'm going to double click onto that dimension. So we have this window here. This window, it tells us the name of what that actual dimension is and the value. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to hit the equal sign, and we're going to say mat. We're going to call this thing mat for material thickness, our material. And we've got this little symbol here that says create global variable. We're in yellow, and so if we hit enter, it's going to give us this prompt. It says create a new global variable, mat, and we say yes. Now you'll notice we've got this little globe symbol on here and our number, and so we click OK. You'll now notice as well that we now have an equation, a sum symbol next to our dimension. And we now, in our feature tree, have this box that says equations. And if we drop that down, we've got mat equals 0.15. If we want to edit this, we can right-click, click Manage Equations, and this will bring up all our equations in our document. So our global variable is that mat is equal to 0.15, and that evaluates to 0.15. If this was some sort of equation, some multiplication, whatnot, it would evaluate to whatever the final number is. And then we have the equation here that D1, so dimension 1 at boss1 extrude, is equal to mat, our global variable, and it evaluates to 0.15. This is the place where we can actually change this as well. So in this value equation section, if we wanted to change that to 0.2, we'd do that here. But we're going to hit OK for now, and we're going to save. So now we've got this value, and we can reference this value. We can call it. And then if we update it, all of them update. And it can be very, very handy. And so this is what allows us to build really strong parametrics into our design. So I've got this panel here, and I know, because I've done this a bunch, that I'm probably going to want like this side panel to be a couple sheets maybe. So maybe it'll be 2 sheets thick, just to give our thing some structure. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this panel, on the inside of this panel. So I want to be one on the inside. I'm just going to hit sketch. And then I'm going to click on it again. I'm going to hit convert entities. So I've converted that outline. I can then exit the sketch, extrude this, but instead of 0.15 here, I'm going to say equals, scroll down one to global variables and click mat. I do not want to merge results. I want this to be a separate panel. So now I can click check. So now what I've done is I've created a second body. So in solid bodies, we've got 2 bodies now. And this one is also, its thickness is defined by this mat. Cool, so now we've got this side. So let's come over to plane 2, sketch. We're going to do basically the same thing. We're going to do a convert entities of this outer panel. Bloop, there it is. We're going to exit the sketch. We're going to extrude. And we're going to extrude inward that way. Our mat. There we go. So now we've got 3 bodies. An alternative to doing that extrusion. So if we undo a bit here, we're going to undo ourselves back. Another option would be to say just doing something as simple as mirror. Because we're working around that right plane, right? We pulled those 2 planes off. I can actually select the right plane to mirror around, select bodies to mirror, and then just select 1 and 2 and hit enter. So now we've got these 2 bodies, and these are based on the mirror. And so they will also continue to mirror if we change the material thickness. And so we now have 2 sides to our object, which is great. So the next thing we'll want to do is add in this panel here. So the panel that will fit on the front. We're going to add in the panel that fits on this angled surface. the panel that fits on this angled surface, the top, the back, and we're also going to do a bottom in this case as well. And that'll give us sort of our basic shape, and we'll start doing some detailing along the way. So let's do the front panel. This one's easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to select a surface. So probably that one will do quite well. That we want this panel to be flush with. We're going to hit sketch. And we're going to draw out the panel. So this panel, we're going to add some fingers to. These are not finger joints in the way that we would do in woodworking, where the actual friction of the joint is holding it together. These are more just for indexing purposes. These will help us with our assembly later on. So I could draw this out as a rectangle, multiple rectangles and trim, but I actually find that I like to draw these out pretty quickly by line. Works quite well. So I'm actually going to go, this one's going to be almost to the top. We'll do it to the top. We may have to come back and make some adjustments as we go. Of that front panel. And so we sort of do these fingers that extend in. And then we'll do across. And there. So we have sort of the basic shape of our front panel there. But some things we know about this front panel is that we want these to actually, this front bottom portion of it, to actually go all the way down. So we can actually make that coincident. There we go. Coincident there. And then, let me just check. Yep, looks like we're still recording. So we have ourselves coincident there. And then we are going to add our feet in to this as well in a moment. We want this line and this line to be equal. We want probably that line and that line to be equal. So we're just setting up some relationships here. And same goes for the bottoms. All right, cool. So now we're going to define some measurements. Let's go with just sort of an offset on this top one. We'll make that 0.75 there. The bottom one we're going to want to be, I think, a little higher. Or it could be the same. Let's make it the same. We'll make those equal. Pretty straightforward. We're now going to add in those feet, though, in a very similar manner to what we did on the outside. But one of the key differences is that we actually want these feet to visually appear square once we assembled this. So if you remember, that distance was 1 inch between that point and the corner. And so we want actually this distance from this point to the corner to also be the 1 inch. And so we can do that. We want it to be 1 inch. But one of the critical things with this is we really want these to be responsive to each other. So if I change that foot size to be larger, ideally I would like it to kind of refresh with it. Whoops. It was not how I wanted that to go. Let's edit that sketch again. If I can remember how to do this. We could create a global variable to do this. We may be able to do it even after we extrude it and just set it to be something. Let's try this real quick. If I copy the name, maybe not. There are a couple ways of doing this. It's a matter of just clicking things sort of in the right order. But maybe we'll make a global. Let's make a global variable, being that we know how to do that. So if we set equal, we can say equal. We're going to call it foot. So we'll create a global variable called foot, which may get confusing if like 1 foot versus inches, but we'll be okay. We know what they are. And so now in this sketch, I can come in and say this thing is equal to foot. One of the key things, whoops, not mat, but foot. One of the key things with putting in global variables is that at this point, if I click this checkbox, it will not be the global variable. I need to click that checkbox first or hit enter, and then I can click that. Now we're linked properly. So let me go back, edit the sketch. So now we've got this global variable that if I change this one, will also change this one, and so the feet will always be consistent. Then we'll take this and set it to be that point to that one. We don't want it to be pierced. We really just want it to be the same height. So we may need to grab this inside edge. Sometimes it's just a matter of clicking around. We make those two collinear. So now our height of that offset is the same. And then we'll probably just throw in the same 60 degrees that we know that is. Make this one equal to that one. Oops. I think we're going to need a dimension there, or just make that line equal to that line. There we go. Looking pretty good. Can exit. So now we've got this shape. We're going to do the features, extrude. We're going to extrude inward like that. And we're going to make it our global variable and not merge it. So now we have this other body. That's going to be our front panel. It's going to fit in really nicely. We'll be able to glue it on this inside surface. Everything will be great. Now what we actually need, though, is to remove the material in our side panels so that this will fit in correctly. There are a couple ways of doing that. We could draw on the front face. We could draw on the side. Ideally, what we'll do is we'll draw on the side, and we'll actually draw all of these sort of in together, these cutouts. So we can do it all at once, and I think that's what we'll end up doing is we'll sort of wait till the end and just do it all at once. So now taking a look at this, we are going to run into an issue. And I'm going to let us run into it, and then we'll go back and resolve it, because we can't in a feature-based modeling software. So first thing I'm going to do is save. Always, after every body you make, just save. So now we're up to like 5 bodies. And so we may want to start naming some things. Like this part we may call like left side outer. This one is the left side inner. The mirrors here, we've got, let's see, right side. And to rename that, I'm just sort of holding down a click, like a slightly long click tends to work on there. So that's right side outer. And this is going to be front. So I have these named. We definitely want to name things sort of as we go. So we've got our panels now. I'm going to save. All right. So the next step is we're going to add the panel that goes across this top. So we're going to begin a very similar way. We're going to sketch. We're going to begin with some lines. Bloop. Same idea with the fingers. Okay, whoops. Come all the way down. There we go. I'm going to make these 4 equal. We're going to need to just pick a dimension. I think we're using 0.75. And so we might even set up that as a global variable if we wanted to, some sort of offset. So there we go. We've got our part. We're going to extrude down. We don't want to merge the result. We want this to be equal to our global variable. I'm going to make sure we're going down. We're going to say OK. So now we run into some problems. These two panels, although they look great here, actually, if we do a section cut, let's try that from the side if it'll show us what we want to see. Yeah. You can see that these two panels are actually going to impact each other. They're going to share the same space. This doesn't work because physics. And so we're actually going to have to make sure that we cut this panel, this front panel, down. So why are we cutting the front panel down instead of this top panel back? Has to do with sort of an aesthetic approach to these. It's nice that panels that particularly that you're interacting on are as sort of flat and smooth as possible. And so in this case, we'll cut this one down. It's also a pretty easy thing to do. So the way we're going to do this actually can get kind of clever. So we're going to hit sketch on this surface. We know that we're going to be cutting down from the top here to some point. And this is where we can actually reference things that we've already made. So we're going to hide the front for a moment. And we can see that where this is actually going to cut into it will not be any, basically, larger than that line, that bottom edge. So if we select that bottom edge, and we say collinear, we can bring our front back, exit. We'll do an extrude cut. We'll say go through all, so we don't even have to think about it. Make sure that our feature scope, though, is only selecting that front one. So now we can cut. And so now, now if we go back and we look at our section view again, you'll notice that we're not impacting. And this is still a fine joint. It'll look nice. And we can still come in and get some glue on the back, and that'll be great. Cool, so we've got our second panel in. Now let's do our third. I think we'll go around the whole thing sort of first, and then we'll start adding in some additional things. This panel is going to need a couple underneath it to add those buttons. The front panel will need some stuff behind this panel here. We'll need some stuff behind it to support the phone, but let's just get our basic panels in first. So we're going to do that. Basically the exact same idea. And you'll notice on this panel, I've just come down directly to this edge. I don't have to worry too much because both these edges, both these panels are going back from sort of that, would that be like a concave shape, I guess. And so because they're going both back in a direction, they're not going to impact each other. The reason why I keep doing, you could do more than one finger on these. I'm just doing one because it generally serves the purpose, at least for these sort of lay-in kind of style. We'll do some others later that are actually going to punch through this surface. And in those cases, we kind of want multiple small ones versus one big one. But for these, the one big finger is just fine. Does a great job for helping us index, just sort of holding things together as we glue. We can just make all of those equal. Good to go. Do our extrusion, flip it. Make that equal to our global variable. So we've got that panel. We'll now do the top one. We're going to do the top one slightly differently. The difference with our top one is that we're going to put a finger on it so that it engages both the front and the back as well. And this will let it just kind of drop in place nicely. How you do these is really up to you, though. I'm just showing you kind of one method. One of the things you can do if you are extremely paranoid that you're going to assemble something wrong, you can either make things assemble only in one way, so having fingers of different sizes in certain locations, or making things so symmetric that they can be assembled in any way. It's sort of up to you. Sometimes it comes in handy to have something be very specific in how it gets assembled. All right, so let's throw a dimension on one of these. They all should be kind of equal to each other at the moment. There we go. So this side's already handled really nicely. So that will go down into this one slightly. We'll have to cut out a piece on that. That's fine. On the back one, we haven't yet defined what that back panel is going to look like, but we do know how it's going to work. So in this case, what we can actually do is just set this value to be equal to mat. Whoops. There we go. Set it equal to our global variable, just like that. And so we know that that panel is going to be that thickness, and so we'll make sure that this always adjusts to it. In this case, we'll want to make those collinear. There we go. Now we're nicely fully defined. Extrude, we're going down with this one. Again, equal to our global variable. And so we're going to save, always save. And if we go into manage equations now, we can see all these instances where our material has been used and where our foot has been used. Okay. So looking good so far. We're closing this thing in. So now let's do the back. So the back we're going to do in a very similar way as we've done everything else. But we actually are going to include the cutout for the top panel because we know that it's there. And now I'm going to do, let me get this side in. Whoops. That one goes here. It goes all the way down. And we're actually going to make use of our other geometries here. So we're just going to select these lines off the front because they're going to be the same on the back. We're going to do a convert entities. There we go, looking good. Make these all the same. That 0.75. Should be good. So that's looking quite stellar. Can I exit, do our extrusion? We're going to go the other direction. Do it equal to our material thickness. and extrude that. There we go. So now, finally, we're just going to toss in a bottom, and we'll have our basic form, pretty much sort of figured out. And then we'll add complexity. So in order to do our bottom, we don't want the bottom on the actual bottom. We want it to be sitting slightly on the inside. So we're going to do a plane, probably off the top plane, and maybe we'll go up an inch on the interior of this. So we'll make this plane. We'll then do our sketch. I'm actually going to flip it over. And so what we want to do with this is we want it to fill the bottom like so. But we also want it to protrude through just slightly on some of these, just so that we can kind of index it in place. And so to do that, I'm just going to draw some lines. So on the front here, maybe we'll go out a bit from the foot, and we'll do just a couple smaller engagement fingers. Do 2 on each side, and we'll figure out where they're going. Whoops. That one needed to be vertical. There we go. Make all of these nice and equal. Come in with our trim tool. I have it set to trim to closest there. I can just remove, whoops. I'm breaking some relationship, probably the original rectangle that I drew. But I'm okay with this. It'll yell at me again. There we go. So we've got these lines, which actually we don't need. And a point, it would seem. There we are. So now the next thing to do is to set probably these equal, sort of corner pieces. Whoops. Did not mean to select the whole thing. Let's try that again. So the corners. Again, we're going to make those equal and pick some dimension. And let's go with, let's see what 2 looks like. Yeah, let's go 1.5. That works. And we probably want to give that some dimension. We're going to say 1.5 again. There we are. So now we've got all these little teeth. We'll exit that sketch. We'll extrude it up. Our material thickness. Don't merge. There we go. Great. So we've got our fully enclosed box at this point. So we're going to save. The next thing I'm going to do is do the cutouts on the sides and any additional cutouts. And so that then we can actually, in theory, assemble these pieces. So let's start on this side. This actually becomes pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to hide the outer piece. We're just going to select all of these. including the ones for the bottom. So these are essentially what is sticking through. You can see it there. All we have to do is say convert entities. We can then unhide our body, exit our sketch, say extrude cut. Because we drew it on this side, we're going to say through all the way through, but we specifically just want to select our side panels. And so now we've got all the cuts we need through these, and so it will be assemblable. We still need to do the front here and the back, so let's do that real quick. Won't take long. So same method, just selecting these existing shapes. And by doing this, if we change the size of these, everything will update. And so we'll do an extrude cut. And what's great with this is because these actually line up with the ones on the back, we can do a through all here as well. So there are those two. And then finally, the last one that we need to do, because we modeled the back one in here, the last one we need to do is this one on the front of this. And we're going to sketch on the front. So we always want to make sure that we're parallel to the cut surface, I guess. You don't want any like angled cuts because the laser cutter isn't going to be able to do that. So we wouldn't say want to cut on the front surface of that little square. And the way we're going to do this one, again, things at angles start to get a little tricky. It's what we actually want to grab is, I think, this one, that front edge, and that one, the bottom. We can say convert, and then join those two lines together. So now we've got that box. And then if we do a extrude cut of this through all but just of this body, you'll now notice that when we look at our side view, that it's perfectly touching. And so this will fit in really quite nicely. And so we're sort of using that, like, what extents of this thing. So what's the biggest dimension that we have to worry about for it to cut through? And we save. So there we go. At this point, we've got our basic box defined. We might say, oh man, you know, these dimensions don't really look right. So when we look at this, it's actually like a little skinnier and that back portion is a bit deeper. So now what we can actually do is we can come in and start making some of these adjustments if we want to, because we're modeled parametrically. So if we come back to that first sketch, the very first one we may say, really, I think this thing should be 10 inches wide and 16 inches long. And so we can make that change. We can hit rebuild, boop, and there we are. Everything updates, all our holes and everything, because we have these relationships defined. Maybe this angle is a bit too steep here, and we actually want that shape to be slightly different. So we can come in here and say, really, let's try to make this 12. Whoop. It's almost vertical at that point. So maybe not quite what we want. We might even define these differently, so rather than using a dimension, using an angle to maintain that. Maybe that's what we'll do. Let's go back in and change how some stuff is defined. So this is a really cool feature of parametric modeling, that we can really go back in and redefine elements of this. So maybe I don't want this to be 5 inches tall like this. Whoops, I don't think that quite adjusted what I wanted it to. But we want this to be controllable a little better by the angle. Let's make that 10. Whoops. There we go. So what I really want to do is control that angle in some capacity, just to find which bit or how I want it compared, I guess. So we wanted this to always be 60 degrees. There we go. Or less. Or more. 80 degrees. Slight angle. There we go. So we'll do that. And everything's updated. The way these cuts have updated, the way this cut has updated to match. So we've modeled them in such a way that everything can update quite nicely. So we're going to save. And so this will be end of video 1. Then I'm going to come back in video 2, and we're going to start adding details to this. We'll add the side boxes to this as well.